Hey guys, I'm Nikki Hernandez, CEO and founder of Turning the Tide Tutoring, and I want to share with you a conversation that I had with a student today. The context of the conversation was this. It was my planning period, and I had my door open, which I normally don't do. But I had my door open, and he comes in, and him and we joke together in the hallway. I don't actually teach this student, but we joke together in the hallway because I play pickleball and I beat him all the time. And so he likes to come in and try to taunt me about pickleball. So anyway, he came in, same old joke, same old laughter. And he sat down, and I could just feel that the energy was different, that he maybe needed someone to talk to, and I think he just needed an adult in his life. So he sat down and we started talking about his classes. I asked him about his grades, and he said that they were good. And he said that he had all A's and B's. And of course, I have to joke with this kid. I've got to pull his leg a little bit. And I'm like, uh-huh, sure, yeah. And so he goes, no, really, I really do. And I said, well, that's cool. And then I asked him, I said, are you taking, like, what kind of classes are you taking? Are you taking general classes, advanced classes? And he tells me that he's taking all general classes. He's not doing the advanced. And I said, I'm curious to know, why are you not taking advanced? And he had told me originally when he said that he didn't take advanced, he said, I don't think I'm smart enough for that. And I said, you know what's funny is I don't believe that you actually think that. And he shook his head and he said, no, he really didn't. But, I called him on it. So that was that. And so then I started to say, well, let me guess. The reason why you're not taking advanced classes, and again, I'm pulling his leg a little bit, but I say the reason why you're not taking advanced classes, oh, let me guess, because you don't want to do the work, you're lazy, this. And he goes, no, it's not that I'm lazy. And I wasn't really expecting that pushback, but he did say that. He said it multiple times, in fact, because I kept pulling his leg. And I said, okay, I think I hear you now. And I said, let me guess. It's not that you're lazy, especially when it comes to things that you want to do and things that you're interested in. But when it comes to things that you're not exactly interested in, you don't want to expend the effort or the time or the energy to do it. Is that right? And he goes, yeah, that's it. and, and so that was what he meant by not being lazy. And so we continued to have a conversation, and I said, listen, I said, you've got a lot to learn about life, but you've grown up a lot. You started off as being kind of immature, and now that you're, when I said, are you a sophomore? I said, are you a junior? And he looks at me like this. And he goes, no, I'm a senior. And I said, oh my God, you're a senior? I didn't know. I honestly didn't know he was a senior, and I wouldn't have guessed it either. Just by the way he acts and conducts himself, I wouldn't have known that he was a senior. So, but then again, we all have an image in our head of what a senior looks like, acts like, talks like. And to me, he just didn't fit that image, but he's a senior nonetheless. So I said, well, you've got a lot to learn. And I said, do you mind if I teach you a few lessons about life that I think will help you and steer you in the right direction? And he goes, sure. So I said, okay, here's what I would recommend. Number one, when you graduate, you're going to see that life is going to come at you fast. And that doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. But in a lot of cases, for people who are unprepared, like I was, when life hits you fast, it can feel kind of hard. It can feel difficult. And I said, but there are three things that you can do to really start preparing yourself now for the life ahead of you. And so, number one was this. I said, your spirituality is number one. And he goes, what does that mean? And I swear, not a day goes by that a Gen Zer or a Gen Alpha doesn't ask me what a word means. It's a whole thing. But I love that they ask. That's a blessing. So anyway, he says, what does that mean? What does that refer to? And I said, well, spirituality is your faith in a higher power. And then he kind of blinks a little bit, and I knew he didn't know what I meant by higher power. So I said, your belief in God. And he goes, oh, yes, okay. And he's also a Hispanic student as well. So that's just something to note that, the religious beliefs of the Hispanic community typically run pretty strong, which I'm fully okay with. So anyway, that's what I said. And then I also said, but your spirituality encompasses your values, your morals, and the strength of your belief in a higher power or God when things get difficult or tough. That's the first thing that you need to be locked in on is your spirituality. And so I broke down what values, morals, spirituality, belief, faith, I broke down what those things meant for him. And he was really understanding, really accepting, really absorbing, I feel like, what I was saying about those things. So I told him, your spirituality is like a compass. It's what guides you when you have important decisions to make. It keeps you grounded, like this tree in my fake background right now. I told him, your spirituality is really like the roots of a tree. And I said, what do the roots of a tree do? And he had a great answer. And he said, the roots of a tree help it get the nutrients it needs. And I said, oh, it's so good. Yes, that's exactly what roots do. It wasn't what I had in mind. It wasn't what I was thinking, but yes, you're exactly right. It's so true. Spirituality is like that. It's like that no matter what you believe. Spirituality is like that. It does provide you with the nutrients that you need. Spiritual nutrients, of course, spiritual food. But on a different level, spirituality is like the roots. And I told him this. I said, spirituality is like the roots of a tree because what happens when you have a pretty aggressive windstorm or a hurricane? What do the roots do? What do they provide the tree? Because they're underground, but the tree's above ground. So in what way do the roots help the tree during a windstorm? And he honestly, he wasn't particularly sure. He goes, I really don't know. And I said, well, have you ever seen a tree, like a really big tree, completely topple over and maybe you walk past it or drive past it and you see the roots of the tree and the tree's completely flipped over and you see the roots out of the ground? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, sometimes when a storm comes, it can knock us over. And if it uproots us, if life's difficulties or challenges uproots us, then we'll be like that tree and we can never get put back again. And we're never really the same. We're not strong. We're weak. We topple over. And sometimes we don't overcome it. But we will all have challenges to face in this life. That's just a fact. And I said, but if the roots are strong and the wind is blowing, the storm is coming through, the roots, their purpose at that moment is to keep the tree stable and grounded. And that is what spirituality does. It keeps us grounded, keeps us stable when those challenges come in because we know what we believe. We have faith in a higher power. We take comfort in that. That gives us a sense of inner joy, inner peace when we are connected to that. And when we're consciously aware that we're always connected to that, it keeps us stable. It keeps us rooted and grounded. And that's what spirituality is meant to do. It's meant to keep us grounded and stable when these trials and tribulations arise. And your values and your morals, that's what keeps you living a life of integrity when you are forced or not forced, but when you're in a situation where you have to make decisions, where you may be pressured to do something that, maybe the storm isn't necessarily that a bad thing happened, but maybe you're being tempted in some kind of a way. But when you have morals and integrity, those temptations that come by, you'll always be able to make the right decision because you're grounded in truth and you're grounded in something deeper than just materialism, the desire of your heart. We all want these things, but the question is, what will we do to get them? What will we do to get what we want? And if we have to compromise our integrity or our faith or our spiritual values to get those things, we've really compromised ourselves. So that was the first thing. The second thing that I discussed with him were, I believe it was his relationships. That's what it was. It was relationships with people. And so, sorry, my mic is moving a little bit, so I'm trying to keep it steady here. I don't know what's going on, but I maybe need to kind of screw it in a little bit tighter. Anyway, so I talked to him about relationships with people, and I said, your relationships with people are the next most important thing. I said, because what happens when you're surrounded by toxicity and drama and negativity? How do you feel about that? And he said, well, other people think you're not really a great person when you're surrounded by that kind of stuff. And I said, that's true. I said, but that wasn't the question. The question wasn't what other people think about you, although what you said is accurate. I said, but the question is, what do you think? What do you feel when you're surrounded by all of these things, these negative situations? And he says, you don't really feel good. And I said, exactly. It puts you in a low state of mind, just a low state vibrationally, a low state emotionally when you're surrounded by all of that negativity. And I said, so your relationships with the people that are around you should always be, you should always be working to have peaceful, healthy, and positive relationships with all people. And then I talked to him about what a friend really was. And I told him, I said, what do you think a friend really is? And I asked him that rather. And he said, a friend is someone who you spend time with, who's there for you. And I said, yeah, exactly. But let me ask you this, something more specific. And I said, if you were in trouble at 3 o'clock in the morning, let's say you were driving somewhere and you got a flat tire and you're on the side of the road, there's no gas station, there's nothing nearby, and you call a friend. And again, this is at 3 in the morning, and they pick up the phone and you say, hey, I'm stranded and I have no way home. Can you come get me? And if that person says, oh no, I'm in bed, sorry, can't come pick you up, call somebody else. Is that your friend? No. I said, but the person who will be there for you when you pick up the phone and you call them at 3 a.m. and you're stranded on the side of the road and that person gets right up out of bed and drives to wherever you are and they come pick you up, that's your friend. I said, but so you want to have great relationships with your friends and with people. But I said, you also want to make effort to have good relationships with all people, even if they're not necessarily your friend. It may just be a colleague, a work associate. It may just be someone who, you pass by. It could be someone who you encounter when you go to buy something. You walk past them, you hold the door open for them, or you talk to the cashier. It's somebody in passing. But, and it may be something who it may not necessarily be as distant as that. It may just be somebody who you see regularly, like a colleague, but that you're not necessarily like close friends with. And I said, but the point is that you want to have positive, peaceful, respectful, and healthy relationships with them too. Because I said, let me ask you a question. Why is it impossible, or do you think it's impossible, to have a great life and have negative relationships with people? Is it possible to have a great life and negative relationships, toxic relationships, dramatic relationships with people, negative relationships? He goes, no, I don't think that's possible. And I said, you're right. It is impossible to have a great life and have negative relationships with other people. It's just not possible. It's not the way we were designed. So I said, in order to have a great life, you have to have positive, healthy, peaceful relationships with people, all people, to the best of your ability. So I said, to the best of your ability, start cultivating really great relationships with the people who you come into contact all the time. And that starts with the people who you're around the most, and then it trickles down into other people who you're around and who you see. And when you start doing that, you're going to start seeing your life change for sure, for the better, when you have better positive relationships with other people. And that doesn't mean you have to be buddy buddy. Sometimes it can just mean that you're kind, and sometimes it can mean that you're just respectful. That's all. It doesn't have to always be a deep, deep, close friendship. But we want to value whatever type of relationship we have with someone. We want to value that for what it is and have it be positive. And so the last thing that I told him was this. I said, the next thing that will make for a great life and will help you strengthen those roots is your work ethic and your goals. And so I asked him, I said, "What are your goals?" And I'll be honest with you, he shocked me. He shocked me. I was not prepared to hear him actually rattle off three amazing goals. Because the kids who I've talked to before, and when I ask them what their goals are, they usually don't have any. And and I told the kid this, and I said, that's not because they're not smart. It's more so, at least where I'm from, it's more about the fact that they have focused on school and academics so much so that they have taken little time, little to no time to think about what they want for themselves. So I told him, I said, you're light years ahead of everyone who I've ever talked to in 13 years. You're the first kid who's actually ever had amazing goals. And I wish I could tell you what those goals were, but I have a feeling that he would rather keep those things private. So I won't tell you what the three goals were, but just know that they were amazing and absolutely incredible goals. And I mean, they weren't superficial. These were not like, oh, I want a Ferrari or whatever. And that's fine. It's a fine goal to have. It's just these goals were a lot deeper than that. And so when I talked to him about work ethic, I said, "How how hard do you think you will have to work to get to those goals, to achieve those goals? How hard do you think you're going to have to work?" And he says, "I think I'm going to have to work really hard." And I said, "Probably so." And I said, "But let me ask you this. Do you know a lot of hardworking people?" And he says, "Yes." And I said, "Do they make the kind of money that you're talking?" And again, this was not like superficial money type stuff. There was deep, deep, deep reasons for why we were talking about these things and money in particular. So I said, "Do you know a lot of people who work hard?" And he goes, "Yes." And I said, "Do their salaries, does the money that they make correlate with the work ethic that they have and the work that they put into their jobs and to their careers in a lot of cases?" Excuse me. And he said, "No, not really." And I said, "You're right." And I said, "Unfortunately, we live in a society where the amount of money that somebody makes does not always equate to their work ethic. It just doesn't." And he nodded and we both agreed that that was kind of the way things seemed to be anyway. And I said, "So it's great to have a work ethic, but just as important as a work ethic is having plans and having goals. That's what is really important, especially the plan. Because I said you've already got the goals, which is the first step. Well, you're light years ahead of everybody else. But next is the plan. What's your plan? If you want to be able to do this, this, and this, excuse me, if you want to be able to do those things, I said, what's your plan to get there? How do you expect to get these things? What is the plan? Because now you know the goal and you know what you're working towards and you know you have the work ethic to get there. But now what's the plan of how you're going to get there? Okay? Because you want to have some general idea day to day of what you're going to do to make those goals hopefully a reality one day. And I said, so here's an example. If we were going to drive to Florida and we didn't have GPS and we didn't really have anything, we didn't have anything at all. We were just getting in our car and we're driving to Florida. I said, how hard would it be to get from where we are to Florida without a plan, without a map? And he said it would be pretty hard. I'm like, yeah, for sure. I said, could we still do it? Yeah, for sure. We could still probably get to Florida. We could figure it out. But would it make it a lot easier if we knew not just where we were going, if we knew not just what the destination was, but we had some semblance of what roads to take, what exit to take, what highway to jump on? And he said, yeah, exactly. So, all in all, this conversation was phenomenal. I truly believe that the student walked out feeling a much stronger sense of purpose in life than he ever had before. Truly a much stronger sense of purpose than school ever gave him. That's for sure. The reason why I tell you this story is to let people know and to let yourself really know that life is it's all about purpose. It's all about love and it's all about the relationships that we have with people. When we have those great relationships and a sense of purpose and structure to our lives, we find happiness. And I told him, I said, listen, if your spirituality and your relationships with people and your work ethic and your goals and your plan to get there are locked in, I said, it's virtually impossible not to find at least some semblance of happiness and success in this life. If those three things are locked in, doesn't matter what storm is going on around us, we're going to be happy either way. And the people who we love are going to be very, very proud of us, no matter what. So I just wanted to share that with you guys today. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for listening again. My name is Nikki Hernandez. I'm the CEO and founder of Turning the Tide Tutoring. And if you want to check out our educational resources, just visit turningthetidetutoring.com. And you can also check out our podcast. It's called The Gentle Year. So I'll talk to you soon. Thank you so much and have a blessed day. Bye.